I was in prison, and you visited me. This verse from Matthew is on the memorial of Father Louie Kaczmarek at Kolbe House Prison Ministry, and it really says it all. I've always had a special connection to Kolbe House, since it was my family parish until my parents divorced and we came to St. John of the Cross. Father Louie Kaczmarek, the man who first started the prison ministry in the 1980s at Cook County Jail, actually baptized my sister and me. Despite all of this, I never really knew about my connection to the Kolbe House growing up. Yet because of a conversation I had with my grandma in Michigan and God's guidance, I chose Maximilian Kolbe as my confirmation saint when I was in 8th grade. I'm sure God was involved when Kolbe House became one of SJC's sharing parishes. That's when I learned about my connection. When we were coming up with ideas for 4U2, I decided I wanted to talk about Kolbe House. Father Louie Kaczmarek died of a brain aneurysm when he was only 50 years old, and every year I go with my mom to his memorial mass in June. These past few years have been especially interesting because artwork Sanctuario has been growing in stages at each annual memorial. I've been to see each new artwork added to the Sanctuario and decided I want to interview the artist and find the meaning behind the art. When it came time to do the actual interview, I didn't want to go. I was upset and worried that I wasn't prepared or organized enough to do a good job of it. I was also afraid I wouldn't be able to connect with the artist at all, thinking they wouldn't care about the interview, because they would see me as an overprivileged kid. I was incredibly surprised at how it turned out. I never expected to spend 4 whole hours getting to know 4 of the most amazing people I've ever met. David Perez and Deacon Pablo both work at Kolbe House, and Victor Lopez and Celine, 2 of the artists that provided the art and the heart of the Sanctuario. It was a dream of Father Craig's to provide a place of reconciliation, healing, and hope for inmates and their families. David Perez welcomed us at the door and was the first to tell me his story. He had spent 28 years in prison, with the last 5 of them in solitary confinement. Before he told me, I wouldn't have even guessed he was ever in prison. He told me the biggest challenge in getting out was to get a job. He said too many find faith in God in prison and plan to lead a different life when they get out, yet all give up at this stage. He volunteered to do construction work for free at inner city churches, a skill he actually learned in prison. He said if they provided the material, he'd do the work for free as long as they recommended him when anyone asked about the work, especially the painting on the church. And he has never been without work since and is now a full-time employee at Kolbe House. Deacon Pablo met Father Craig about a week before he died and said one thing. Father Craig really challenged him with was that if he was going to do real help in the prison ministry through God, he'd have to be able to look into every inmate's eyes and see Christ. The first time he heard this, he told us it sounded extremely difficult, especially considering the crimes that some of them had done. He thought he wouldn't work at this ministry very long because of this, but he soon began to love his work and the way the Lord was present in it. But at the time, he was only a volunteer. He felt God was calling him to be much more than that, guiding him to the path he set for him. And through the work of the Lord, a job opened up. Deacon Pablo immediately left his previous job that paid $10,000 more yearly than working at Kolbe House would. He got the job and has now been there for years and can't imagine doing anything else. Many people will call Deacon Pablo's decision risky and irrational, but I believe God called him, and only God knows your true path. He also told me a miraculous story about some prisoners in maximum security that prayed for his friend that had a lung biopsy that was positive. His friend later went back for another biopsy, and it was miraculously negative. No one had an answer why that happened, but Deacon Pablo knew. He went back to the prison and shared the good news with the inmates, who could see the power of God in their prayers and continue praying even in the darkest times. Victor Lopez was the first artist to work on the Sanctuario. He had also been in prison for many, many years for a number of crimes. It was humbling to me that he spent so much time convincing me that it was his fault, because many of us make bad choices and are quick to go and blame someone else. Victor didn't blame anyone, least of all his family. He kept saying, I came from a good family. My parents were both working people and raised us to do the right thing. I just made bad choices. He had been sentenced to 14 years and pretty much gave up when he went to prison very young. I missed the best years, I had thought, he told us. I didn't think I had anything else to lose. He lost so much time in his life, yet when he told me his story, he only pointed out the positives. He never complained about anything that happened. He said that God brought him the gift of art when he was in prison, and he is endlessly grateful. God sent him another gift when he met another artist in prison. They would share their art with each other through bars as they grew in God's light. He said this other prisoner was on death row. How amazing that God used someone like that to do his work. It should be an eye-opener to all, myself definitely included, showing the value each person has in God's eyes. It was the story of the prodigal son, over and over. Victor was honored when he was asked to paint the first stage of the Sacrario, and told me with such great light in his eyes that he now sees God working, not just daily in his life, but many times a day. He's getting married in May, and even though he has almost no money at all, he gets occasional art projects, recycles, and scraps, and is grateful to God for the life he has. And then there's Saladin. His story is truly incredible. He spent time in prison as a result of trying to stop his children's mother from killing herself and her baby. Despite his efforts, he ended up serving 3 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. But the gracious hand of God was in his life as well. When he got out of prison, he went to see his daughter, who at the time was in a homeless shelter. He didn't know how he was going to find work to turn his life around, feeling almost completely helpless. On the way home, he passed an artist coalition and went in to see if he could find work as an artist. They had more than 35,000 artists in their database, yet not one of them qualified for the huge project at the Kolbe House because it required an artist that had been incarcerated. Now what's the chance of that? Who else but God guided that one? And the project was the third stage of the Kolbe House Sacrario. He started the artwork with his pencil sketching, and then suddenly ended up in the hospital with a brain aneurysm, of all things. If you remember from before, that's what Father Craig died of, and only 33% of people survived this affliction. Yet it was only a week or two before the dedication of the memorial mass. So against everyone's wishes, including his doctors, he pulled out his IVs and left the hospital to finish this incredible artwork. Again, coincidence? Or God at work? Kolbe House had given Saladin their goals, what they wanted included in the invisible language of the art, as he called it, and also gave him some creative latitude. What he did with that was miraculous. He painted a Kolbe House narrative mural that you see on the screen. Many parts of that artwork and his ideas struck me. He included all colors and types of people because no race or type is exempt. He had a brain above the prison walls with puppet strings attached to a small child below, tempting the children on the street to a life of crime at an early age. He had one mother that was able to save her son from a dark life on the street, and another mother that lost her child to a life of crime. There's a peace circle representing the work that Father David Kelly does in bringing together families and people torn apart from the destruction of crime to find peace and hope in each other and God. Every single detail of this intricate artwork has a story to tell. Even the police tape often seen at crime scenes shows the word caution and police, showing some of the mistrust of the police in the neighborhoods in the confusion of protection. I really liked how he had the road of life in the middle of the mural. It showed a fork in the road, the narrow road leading to the light and life in God, and the wider, easier, darker road leading to the sinful, terrible things and actions of people in this world, and life on the street. Even the green in the middle of the fork meant something. We all want greener pastures, and try to head in that direction, yet the choices we make affect our life. Above all these street prison scenes is a broken and battered looking heart, with a Kolbe House band-aid in the shape of a cross. And surrounding the heart are God's hands, holding this broken heart, breathing hope into it, and everything else in the scene. Now I invite you to look at this artwork and let it speak to you the way it did for me. These interviews opened my eyes to the pain and the value of every human being. No one starts out wanting a dark life. personally change anyone's life apart from my own, but God can. And we can pray to Him for them and their families. We can believe in them, and in the cases of these 4 men, take their inspiration and make the world better, and bring the light of Christ through the darkness.